Welcome to episode 48 of Engaging Franciscan Wisdom. My name is Sister Michelle Lallier, and I'm your host today. I'm happy to introduce our guest, Sister Meg Earsley. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really
It's-
excited for this.
I am too. What a treat to have you here for conversation about culture and the Franciscan way. Meg, I've come to know you as a storyteller with a great passion for life and for relationships. I think we first met at the Franciscan Federation Conference in St. Louis, perhaps in 2019. You were pretty new to religious life at the time, embarking on steps in what we call initial formation, which is a time of discernment regarding this potential call. So you've been professed now as a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration, which is located in La Crosse, Wisconsin, for a little over a year. You recently concluded time on mission in Ascension, Bolivia, where, among other things, you ministered at a nutrition clinic, helping families with malnourished children. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back in the States and it's good to be here with you.
I'm good. So, as I noted, you love stories. So today we're considering a big topic, one of culture in relationship to Franciscan and gospel values. You chose, or perhaps you had the experience of being chosen by the Franciscan path. What does that mean for you? And perhaps you can tell us a story or two to illustrate.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I could tell you lots of stories. But to get us started, like what was my first call was really I was in adoration in a little church in Fairfield, Iowa, which is where I was living when I heard and we always say we hear the call. It's like this like deep internal knowing that all of a sudden you hear you have this, I'm going to say spark. It might seem like an idea, but it doesn't go away. So I had the spark that says you said essentially you should become a sister. And for me, that was a really interesting spark because I didn't know any sisters.
Wow.
I had grown up, and I'll go ahead and say post-habited times. So had I met sisters, I didn't necessarily realize that I'd gone to public school and I had been active in my parish, but for whatever reason, I just hadn't been exposed to a lot of women religious. So so this is a very interesting call, and I had to Google. I mean, this is right. This is the day and age. Google what it was to be a person religious and how that worked, and were there and where were they? And I didn't, there was a lot I didn't know, especially I think because I grew up in a smaller town, and then I lived more rurally, and so maybe the exposure was less that way too. But so fast forward, all of my discernment and all of my research on Google led me to FSPA. So I won't go into all the specifics, but sometime around 18 uncanny coincidences, I decided that maybe they weren't coincidences anymore. And then really wholeheartedly entered into the process of looking at becoming a sister with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. So thus we are here today. I feel like I was very directed, and it's just a question of, boy, what could God possibly have in store for me, right? So it's a big mystery, and it is a beautiful mystery.
And it sounds like you were open to being moved in a direction that you never would have thought of on your own.
Right. Absolutely not. I was a professional in the IT world. So I was working at a software company. I was a director, very happy in leadership. It was great. And so very big surprise. But
Very big surprise.
I've always been very dedicated to God and to following God's path, being on God's journey. And this just was something that was a change in the direction, but still on that journey. So it's been an interesting and exciting, challenging, and adventurous. I could use all those words to describe what my life has been like over the last 4 years.
Wow. And more to come.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you for giving us a taste of that initial turning towards an alternative way of living that you hadn't considered before or really even seen before.
And I always say that sometimes, God speaks to everyone in different ways. Some people, God needs to be really direct. So I feel like I've been blessed with clarity throughout my life, but specifically for this part of the journey, definitely had the clarity I needed.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful. Thank you.
Mhm.
So let's take a moment. We talked about how you were drawn to religious life and specifically to the FSPAs. Now, as noted in the intro, last year you made your first vows. So what is it now that you are a sister? What does that mean to you? What does it look like in your life?
Right. And so and Franciscan specifically,
Mhm.
I didn't necessarily understand everything that was Franciscanism when I joined the Franciscan sisters. But as I've learned and grown about all the different things, whether it's gospel living or inclusion or all is gift or all these different beautiful parts or values of Franciscanism, the more I learned, the more I realized how perfectly placed I am. So
Mm.
that's a joy.
Mhm.
As far as being a sister, I really did discern that because there are a lot of different ideas
Mhm.
out there,
Yeah.
even in religious language. What does it mean to be a sister? Because some people consider it's more of a title. Some people consider it's like, I don't know, I want to say this magical thing that you get with when you take your vows and all of a sudden the sister emerges. But I really spent time discerning that because I wanted to decide what being a sister meant to me. And so I'm a bit of a practical thinker. So that's kind of how I usually start. And then I go into the heart. So my practical thought was, like, what is a sister?
Mm.
Like, what the role of a sister in the family, as an example. So the mother and father are the teachers, and they're the ones kind of over with the authority and the needing to lead. And maybe there is maybe another role that's maybe a little under that needs to be led, needs to be taken care of. So maybe you've got that relationship. But a sister that's not the relationship of a sister.
Yeah.
Relationship of a sister is more one of equality, more one
Mhm.
of equal standing. So whether we're sisters or sisters and brothers, the kind of the siblinghood of it all, right? And so what does that actually look like? So I found inclusion, equality, all being that, not just like other sisters. So there could be, like, okay, so we're sisters together. So my community, we're all sisters together. But I become a sister to the whole world.
Right.
So what does a sister to the whole world look like?
Mhm.
And it really is one of presence and acceptance and love.
Mm.
Because I think about my sisters and how we have really grown to become like each other's support and advocates and presence to each other. And that's our purpose. So going in and taking my first vows, that was the presence that I wanted to bring.
Mm.
And hopefully I'm doing.
It seems in how you carry yourself is not quite the right word, how you are. Your presence seems to be infused with joy and freedom and right placement, perhaps we might say, that the fruit of your discernment is precisely the fruit of the Spirit. That's what I perceive and experience in you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good sign
It is a
that
good
you're
sign.
on the path with God and with God's people and with all of creation.
And then you're right, because that does include all of creation. So, because if we're talking about like all that God's created, it people and humankind is very important. God created all of these things. So how can I be a sister to all of God's creation?
Mhm.
Because we're all created by God. So that kind of makes us all siblings, right?
It does.
Very
Yeah.
interesting and pondering for sure.
That's right. A lot of food for thought there and heart connection. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Let's maybe move a little more current to your most recent kind of experience of service and ministry. Could you tell us some stories again about what your life was like in Bolivia and how your perspectives were impacted or changed during your time there?
Right. And I think it's good to kind of start with like, what was my purpose, right? So
Yes.
why would I go to Bolivia, right?
Mhm.
We don't actually have a presence down in Bolivia. We don't have, we as a community don't necessarily have a large presence in other areas. So we have some sisters in different different states, and then we have a few in other countries. So Bolivia was a brand new place for us. We've visited a few times for a little while, but never have we spent a large portion of time. The purpose is actually goes back to my formation experience, right? We all know COVID happened, right?
Right.
To put that out the door and never think about it again. But because of COVID, that happened to start in the middle of my canonical year. So that was my first year as a novice.
Okay, so that's what a canonical year means for those that don't know.
Yes. And so it's kind of like a more learning, growing, understanding your community and what religious life is, what it means to be religious. So we've got that. So I'm in Chicago. COVID starts. That was its own adventure some other time. But then, of course, it continued through my apostolic year. So I had the original intent had been for me to spend a little time in Bolivia, maybe 3 months or so during my apostolic year, which is my year out ministry. And so and then, of course, after my canonical year. Sorry, make sure that I include all that information for people. And so because that couldn't happen because of COVID, we kept delaying. The opportunity came up for, okay, so I could certainly do that. I don't have to be a novice in order to do this time of immersion in another culture. So maybe we could do it after. So as time went by, we realized it didn't have to be limited to 3 months. That was because it was part of my apostolic year. So because I was open and available, I was able to spend a little more time. And the intent of that was to experience another culture and to be fully immersed in the culture. And I did in my canonical year have the experience of getting to meet people from many different cultures. That was from the standpoint of my culture.
Yes.
And so they were coming as guests and as visitors or as even companions or as sisters and brothers to my culture. And so what would it be like for me to go to? So that was the purpose of me going to Bolivia. And so I was able to spend 6 weeks in language school in Cochabamba with a group there. And that was good learning. I come from no Spanish.
And how long were you there?
6 weeks.
And it's not very long.
20 years, 3 months, or much longer. But that's okay. That's okay. So I did get all present tense learned. Well,
That's
all is strong. All is strong. But like this understanding of how present tense works. So that was good. And then I started my time in Bolivia. In Ascension, which is in the more tropical region. So there's mountains in the tropical region in Bolivia. And so this was more in the tropical region. So, I was greeted by palm trees and fruit trees and beautiful flowers and, of course, beautiful tertiary sisters of St. Francis in Bolivia. That was the group that I was fortunate to be able to live with, immerse myself in their culture as well as the Bolivian culture. And so I stayed in their convent, and then I went to work and minister with at the nutrition clinic, which essentially. Okay, so I'm just going to say this, and because it cracks me, this is an example of a different culture, right?
Right. Okay.
So of course these were habited sisters. Yeah. So there is a little bit of, and I think there was just a general air of trust that went along with that habit. So the people in Ascension saw a habited sister. Whatever she has to say is probably good. So, so essentially what we would do is we would walk around the different neighborhoods. And Sister Yanira, who was the sister I spent most of my time, would go and talk to the families, and she'd see a child that looked like they could use a little help, and she'd say, "Your kid's skinny," and they would be, "Oh yeah," or, "Oh, do you think so?" So that kind of reaction. And I remember the first time, I kind of was, my heart stopped a little bit because I thought, oh my gosh, what would happen if I walked up to somebody in the United States and said, "Hey, your kid's skinny." Different culture. So and what was important is that there was education and there was help with some food if it was necessary, and a program that she would then introduce them to. And then they would be able to get that. And I say she would because I spent a lot of time accompanying
Mhm.
because of my comprehension of the language, and being able to communicate in that way was difficult for me. So,
Right.
especially in the beginning,
Yeah.
it was a lot of, my head is spot.
Well, and you're talking about a subset of the language. If you're talking about help, for
For
example,
sure. For sure.
that's a little different than "How are you?"
Right. Right. So, that was absolutely a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And if we take it back to what lesson can
Mhm.
I bring back with me,
Mhm.
it is absolute compassion for anyone whose language is not their first language. Because
Mhm.
even being immersed totally for 8 months, there are still times, and I always say, this table conversation, homilies, and readings. So those are that's the three that
Repeat them again. Table
table
conversation,
conversations, homilies,
homilies,
and then the readings.
the
So
readings,
right,
scripture. Okay.
yeah, and sometimes I get lucky because I catch a word or two. I think, oh, I know that story. I would say there are probably 3 times where I actually got the homily.
Mm.
Don't tell the priests there.
No.
But, and then table conversation, there's a different, flow to it. There's cadence, and there's a rhythm that's faster, and on topics that, maybe I wouldn't, have the words to. So it's just a challenge. So that compassion and bringing me is very important to me, because that was a big challenge for me. And I can only imagine anyone that is looking either to migrate here or to permanently come here, or is even just passing through,
Yeah,
what incredible challenge it is.
true.
Mhm.
Well, growth and compassion is pretty key in the growth and living the gospel.
True.
Yeah,
True.
good. So, returning to what we began with, I can imagine that transitioning to religious life as a sister, and then within a couple of 3 years going to serve in Bolivia, both had elements of crossing cultures.
Oh, for sure.
And so, can you give us some examples of what it is to live interculturally, and again, what you've been learning about that?
Right. Well, and my community, we're blessed with a real attitude of inclusion. I'll say it that way. Even our constitutions have a title called unity and diversity. So the
Mm.
idea is we are united
Mhm.
as a community, but we are accepting and and promoting of all of our gifts and how we those gifts. So that that's a blessing in itself. But there's patterns and structures that change. I had never lived in a larger community. So I really, before joining community, appreciated and enjoyed living alone. So probably my biggest fear of coming to community is like, am I going to be able to even do community? I have no idea. Um, but I found it to be an incredible joy. So, although I valued my time alone because of the quiet and the only having to consider my own thoughts and ideas, being in community has a richness, communal sharing, all being in this kind of, I'm going to say, in my case, is community, is living community. So being in this living situation together, and then being a support to each other, which is something I had never experienced. And I was, oh, this is a really good thing. This whole mutual support. This is something I could sure get used to. So I have really enjoyed living in intentional community. I think I've lived in 2 different intentional communities, and then one with the Franciscan mission service,
Mm.
which was a whole different thing. So here we had intergenerational living with older sisters.
Yep.
And then when I was staying with Franciscan mission services for 3 months, it was actually intergenerational with younger people. So like most of the people there, with a few exceptions, were in their 20s. And it was like a whole different, it was like, oh, and then, you just continue to grow in understanding and compassion, and your whole view of things has broadened. The more different cultures or different types of personalities, different, the differences, I would say, the more differences you are exposed to, the more you start to see the beauty in the diversity.
And is that also, just to move with that a moment more, when you said earlier unity and diversity, that in the growing appreciation of greater diversity or difference, you also found a greater unity, a more, I don't know, a deeper unity or something like that, that
Right,
both were
right.
true.
Because because the unity is based on the acceptance
Mhm,
of the diversity.
mhm.
So as opposed to being, I think they talk about this in the history of religious course. I'm sure there's about assimilation and how that and that word, although sometimes is still used to mean other things, assimilation to me means that you're going into another culture and all of who you are is expected to be folded into that and to become like that culture, whatever that culture is that you're going into. And I think some of that is necessary, but there's also the other side of things where bringing your uniqueness and who you are is also very necessary when you're coming into another community, another culture. And then how do those things work together? So I think that is the joy of the phrase and the living of unity and diversity is there's an acceptance of each person's uniqueness. And
Oh, that's great. You referred to the Franciscan Mission Service, and for those who might be new to that, could you say something
yeah,
about it?
sure, Franciscan Mission Service has been here for many years. I'm not say how many because because I don't remember. Um, but and they have two different avenues. So the group that I was with are what they call overseas missioners, and so the idea is they help to prepare people to spend time immersed in another culture. And so I happen to get the luxury of participating in the program. Hasn't been done a lot lately with other religious communities. So it's normally the lay missioners. Franciscan Mission Services, mostly lay missioners, and they are part of that program. And so Franciscan Mission Services actually sponsors people to do this cultural immersion. So I got to be in the formation of that as preparation for my cultural immersion. I hope that made sense. But then also we had the joy of, and the reason why many of the people were younger in the group, were they also have a year of service after you leave college. You know, the opportunity of a year of service in the DC area. So this was based out of Washington, DC. And so we all lived in intentional community. They did their year of service. We did our formation and some volunteering as well. But we all came together and there was very intentional living community. There were no assumptions. There was a lot of time spent getting to know each other and becoming closer to each other.
Great experience. That you could bring back to your life within the religious community. That's one of the things I love about, you mentioned adventures, but when we expand beyond our comfort zones and we do move into immersion experiences or expand our relational experience, we learn. And then we go back to perhaps where we've come from, family or community, neighborhood, and we bring that expanded sense of self, or as you noted, compassion, to the local situation. And there's almost like a cross-pollination that happens when we cross communities or cultures or generations or values. You know, we learn.
Yeah, because we bring that back, and then we broaden the group that we come back to,
Right.
with how we've been brought. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah. And in religious life, that's happens a lot because there's a lot of us living intentionally in these ways. And that's part of what I love about religious life is, the opportunities to grow. There's discipline, as there is with every spiritual disciplines, boundaries that go with a particular lifestyle, whatever the lifestyle. And I know for me, and it sounds like for you as well, the rhythm or structure of religious life is a good fit. So it frees you to be more of who you are than if you weren't in a common life. Sounds like you took like a duck to water, so to speak, to living a common life, even though you hadn't had the experience. And you wouldn't have known it if you
I wouldn't
hadn't
have.
responded to that nudge.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I would have never gotten the joy of community, living in community. And I think that that is a great takeaway, which honestly I hadn't thought about before. But if I hadn't felt the call to become a religious sister, I wouldn't have ever experienced that. I would have gone through my whole life saying how much I loved being alone. And one of my favorite things was to say, because I don't have to, I don't have to bring other people into my emotions, into my, and I think I would call it hurt today. At the time, I didn't have a word for it, but like, I don't want to have to bring other people into that space of mine because then I have to consider them before I do things and I have to give them the time and the energy and the love and the compassion, right?
Mhm.
And so now I've been living that for 4 years and I don't even know how I could ever do anything else. I mean,
Mhm.
that's probably one of my greatest joys.
I want to stay with that for a moment because I think at this time, at least here in the United States, with smaller families and more mobility, fewer people, for various reasons, have the opportunity to live in community. And that it's um, when we had larger families, like for me, I'm the oldest of six, it was like just transfer from family into a few more siblings. But
I'm
I was
sure.
used to being with siblings and the gift and the struggle of that, because it isn't, as we know, always easy. But when you speak of both the intentional community in your religious life and also with the predominantly lay community configuration of Franciscan mission service, that really is a movement that's happening around this country and around the world. Is how do we intentionally gather people in intentional communities to learn from one another and to discern together and to nurture one another's faith and to do together what we can't do alone in terms of service. And so I know just for where I'm living, that's part of our commitment is a reopening post-COVID with an intentional community, intergenerational men and women. That it gives me great hope and joy. Previously, it was in a volunteer program, which closed during COVID. That was the same thing, structured differently. It was an intentional community. So I love that early in your religious life, you've been able to immerse yourself not only in religious life, but a lay community as well. And my hunch is it'll keep happening. You'll
Oh, I
keep
think it might.
expanding and growing.
Mhm. Well, and it does broadens the definition too, right? We are open and
Yes.
we're a little bit more available to maybe reimagine what living communities, intentional communities looks like. Because we are aware, community religious communities aren't the same size they were
Mhm.
30, 40, 50 years ago.
Mhm.
And so what does that look like? Does that mean we all stay in one place because we need to stay in our community, or can we reimagine
Yeah.
what community looks like and how we live in community
Mm.
to expand out to other religious communities, lay people, whatever. And I know that, like I think we might have been in this conversation together. What the Franciscan Federation is
Yes.
looking with our immersion group. What does intentional community look like now? And that's a need, a want, and a desire in for sure our country. And I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised other places too. And then how do we live that? And what does that look like?
And it occurs to me, going back to the theme of this particular interview around culture, that is an intentional community is counter to the dominant U.S. culture.
For sure.
And religious communities are among those, including lay communities, that can provide opportunities for immersions of living a common life and learning, I guess, as the gospel might say, to live. They'll know we're Christians by our love. Love implies
Right.
relationship. And so the gift for those that want to, for a shorter, longer term, explore intentionally living in community. And of course, some communities are virtual, some communities are dispersed geographically, but meet virtually or occasionally in person. There's just a whole range, but that's for another interview.
Right. Because it just is, that's what it gets exciting, right?
It
Because
does.
I'm thinking about, what could that mean? I love imagining. I love dreaming. I'm a big, I always say I've always been a dreamer. So those opportunities are great. But if we take that idea of culture and community back to Bolivia, it's very different from the United States. And it was such a gift to get to see things like hospitality. Like you could just show up at someone's house and they will set out chairs for you, get you something to drink and talk to you for however long, half an hour, or just the faith and the desire to be in that faith with others is very strong. Sharing and like we would go visit people who had no money. They had dirt floors and they had slats for their, as opposed to actually having walls in their house. They just have repurposed board that they would nail up. And that's how they made their bedrooms. Their kitchens were outside and they ate outside. They would give us gifts because they wanted to give us something as not even as a thank you, as a sharing. It wasn't a thank you. It was part of hospitality and part of sharing. And you came to our house and we need to share with you. I do have a funny story. So one day, this was normal. We would go and people would bring us plastic chairs and we'd often sit down and we'd all just have a chat, talk about how their family's doing, what their needs might be. Sister Yanira might check something, maybe an abuela, a grandmother's knees were hurting and she might have some ointment that they could put on. So those kinds of things. But this one family went to, it was a husband and wife and daughter. And the wife was very upset. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I haven't gone to the store yet. I have nothing that I can give you." And we're like, "It doesn't matter. You don't have to give us something. We're fine. Like, we ate breakfast. Everything's good." And she's like, no. So she kind of snuck off. So we're like, no, just sit down. It's fine. So we talked with the husband and the daughter, and as she disappeared. And at some point she comes back and she's just like beaming. She's so excited because she realized that she has this gift that she can give us, food that she can share with us that they had roasted the night before. And so she brings it and it's a fully, you can totally see it's an armadillo.
Oh my goodness.
Armadillo. And it's got its little, it's got its armor on and it's totally been roasted and its head's still there. So like, okay, you have to react positively because this is very, the knowledge, immediate knowledge, this was very important to her to offer this hospitality. And I was like, I have to eat armadillo. And so I was like, oh, that's wonderful. I've never had armadillo before. And so then she's like, oh, this is how you eat it. You just stick your finger underneath the armor, right? You stick your finger in and grab a bunch of the meat. And then you put a little salt on a little lime. And so I was like, oh, that's great. And so all the enthusiasm I could muster, I dug right in and got a few good pieces, ate it, and enjoyed the company. And so I can say I think it tasted more like pork than chicken, but just in case you ever get the chance to try it. The point is that bit of hospitality was so important to them. The only option I had was to respond in gratitude and just enjoy it. Right? So I had my little conceived notions of how we could talk about food safety. I have lots of stories of food safety and eating wild caught animals. And at one point I was like, oh, is that a Patagonia? Anyway, it's an endangered animal. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I eating an endangered species? But all those thoughts, not as important as accepting that hospitality. So I just think then, not that we should ever compare, right? But I think if we compare the United States culture and how we don't even answer the phone if we don't recognize the number.
Yeah.
If we'd have somebody ring our doorbell answer it, or would we be like, who could that be? So then we might not answer the door unless we previously, worked something out with a friend. So we have lost that ability to really be hospitable and neighborly to people we don't, right? So we've really kind of enclosed ourselves. So this really broadened my view and opened me up to the possibility that there is more to just hospitality than just taking care of our friends, right? So
Yeah.
it was a beautiful lesson that time and time again just kept coming and coming up with the amazing generosity of the people in Bolivia.
Well, and what I hear, Meg, also is that you earlier mentioned the importance of acceptance. You didn't judge.
Right.
Where was that kept? Was it refrigerated? Has it been heated?
Right.
What procedures have been followed here? But
Mhm.
in a way, it's a matter of trust. You were trusting Sister, is it Yadira?
Indira, yeah.
Yadira, and her sense that she would keep you safe, even though it's unfamiliar to eat in this way or whatever.
Right.
And you were able to suspend judgments and simply enter into the experience and moderate your response, which might have been of shock or surprise or dismay or whatever combinations there were. But your orientation interiorly was to honor and to celebrate and to learn. And that attitude will bring us a long way in learning about unity and diversity.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Ooh, I feel like I've been down to Bolivia sitting on a plastic chair.
It was lovely.
Yes, yes,
There is just so much beauty, especially to the people.
yes.
Of the people there. Just incredible, incredible. Yeah, and I think going back to the suspending judgment, I thinking of the word detachment, right?
Yeah.
So Franciscan value, I think it's
Mhm.
technically called
Yep.
detachment. I think what we might use the word here of holding things lightly, because for
Yes.
something detachment seems like I don't care, right?
Mhm.
But holding things lightly says that, there might be things that are valuable to me,
Mhm.
but I can hold those lightly. So when it food safety, great example. So people would have just like things sitting out all day. So even at the convent, food would just sit out. We'd have it for lunch. It would sit out till dinner, and then we cook it, warm it back up, and eat it. Right. And so holding things lightly is knowing that for my culture, having, let's say, rice and chicken, a rice and chicken dish sitting out all day
Mhm.
would be very unhealthy. We would all get sick and be in big trouble with food poisoning at the hospital. Right. So this is how the judgment I could have. But the holding it lightly is to say, but these sisters are here all the time, eating the food this way all the time, and they're not sick. So maybe I can hold that lightly, set aside that value. I would
Mhm.
call it the food safety of value that I came to Bolivia with, and see what happens. You might guess I didn't get sick, not even once, not even after the armadillo. It was a little, no, not even after the armadillo. So that speaks so highly to me. So, and then I kind of had a question then. Well, why do I think that if food sits out all day, I'm going to get sick? Right. And so I realized that in our culture, even having a small chance of something happening means that we shouldn't do it. Right. In this case, food safety. So even if it was a 1% chance that food sitting out all day might make us sick, then we probably would throw it away.
Mhm.
So I probably won't anymore. But so then understanding that that is a cultural value. And who knew food safety was a cultural value, right?
Right,
And
right.
it was an absolute to me before I went to Bolivia. And just allowing myself to hold things lightly enough so that I could learn in that way made an incredible difference.
Mhm. That's a very powerful story because it reveals the assumptions we move in. And we all have assumptions just because we were raised a certain way and have certain experiences and have certain temperaments. And without exposure to diversity or difference, we can just assume that everybody's like that. And it's easier then to judge. I'd like to share something that a teacher of mine who is very committed to cross cultural work, how to bring forward what's universal in the human family. Her name was Angeles Arian, and she was a cross-cultural anthropologist. And one of the things she talked about with detachment, which I find another like window or lens to consider, is it's not disconnecting. It's caring deeply from an objective place.
Mm.
And so to me, that relates to acceptance, coming with open hearts and minds to actually witness, see, be present to, and learn, and not come in with preconceived understandings that we're going to impose. So detachment, and to bring it back again to, as you mentioned, the Franciscan piece, Francis, I think, was a master at this. He, not as a young kid, but he grew into, perhaps the technical word is sine proprio, without attachment. He didn't attach to things or opinions or, ways of doing things. And he was therefore able to be radically open to the movement of spirit right there at that time, whatever was happening.
Sure.
In a human way, he did as best he can, could,
Sure.
just like each of us do.
Exactly.
But I appreciate you bringing up the detachment in that beautiful image of holding lightly. I think we'd move more gently through the world if we would realize it's not about violating our own values or dishonoring what we've learned. It's about being open to deepen or strengthen our learnings as part of a life journey. Maybe one of the other Franciscan values of continual conversion,
Right.
continually turning to God and to neighbor. So thank you. That was a very rich reflection.
Yes. I think probably that opportunity might have, I don't want to pick my greatest gift, but really that opportunity to really understand that holding things lightly, that detachment might have been my greatest gift of going to Bolivia.
It'll impact the rest of your life. Yeah. And you wouldn't have known it if you hadn't gone.
Right.
Beautiful.
Right. I'm seeing a pattern here. I wouldn't have known about living if I hadn't answered the call. I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't said yes. It's so seeing a pattern of saying yes, it has really good ramifications.
Stepping out when you don't know what it will mean. That's huge, to risk and to trust. Let's savor that for a minute. What would it be to live more deeply trusting or willing to take risks that we're led to? It's not blind. It's
Absolutely.
informed by a movement of spirit or a discernment process, but be willing to do it. Choose it. Well, I'm wondering, maybe we should move on to this piece of particular, explore if there's anything further about Franciscan values or stories that speak to your experience and what they might teach us. Is there anything else you'd like to open up there?
Yeah, I think two of the biggest gifts that I had while I was in Bolivia is to be able to practice the gift of presence and just really concentrate wholly on relationships without having outside things. Like I didn't have to get things done. Didn't have like deadlines. I didn't have like goals. I had just this time in a culture that was totally different to everything I understood with the language that I couldn't always communicate in. So it's harder to try to layer in my values and my preferences and those kinds of things if I can't articulate them, right? So although I would have liked to magically been able to articulate it a lot more, but I think it was a really good thing because it really put me focused in the presence and what that actually means. And it's like so foundational and so the start of everything. So even if you go to a job, having that presence is so important. Ministry, a 9-to-5 job. You could be at a factory and that being your primary goal is going to change the life that you're having. And so it was really such a gift to be able to do that and to just focus on that. And so how do I bring presence back here? And once I start to have these different things that I do, because I'd love to just live the rest of my life and I'm just going to be present. But knowing that there's more to, there's layers of different things. How do I continue to make that foundation? And so that's something that now that I've come back to the United States and I've been here about a month. And so how do I start to integrate all these things and, you know, having that foundation of presence, the foundation of relationship in everything I do? How do I make that as dominant or predominant in my life now and not to get busy, right? With all those important things that I need to do. So how do I do that?
Yes. And that's part of just maybe to weave around when you have an extended cultural immersion experience, we need to build in times of reflection and integration. So the wisdom of being able to have this month, for example, and you had mentioned to me that there's a program you'll be going to that was it with FMS to?
Yes, yeah. It's with Franciscan Mission Services, and it's kind of like you do the initial formation, and then they call this the reentry retreat. So
Exactly.
how do we process and work through our experiences? How do we take that into the world? And then we have this incredible thing that they call, well, the world calls reverse culture shift. So
Yes.
when you first go into a new culture, you're like, whoa, it can be very overwhelming. And I absolutely experienced that. There were days everybody's like, are you sleeping? I'm sleeping great. I'm so exhausted at the but so there's this coming back into this culture and you start to see things like it's having conversations with people and, like they're focusing on, let's say I'm going to make something up. Like how many leaves are on the sidewalk? Nobody has said, but just as an example, they focus on something and I'm like, so does it matter? There's children who aren't getting enough to eat, and there's people who don't have the ability to maintain heat in their homes. So those kinds of things. And how do you work through that? And how do you create? Take what you've learned, put that together with how you live your life, but then also how do you live your life now in this culture? Knowing what you know, I guess would be the way to say that. How does that all work together?
Yes.
So that's what my time now is being spent.
Yeah, that's critically important for myself too. After spending 5 years in Nicaragua, there has to be a way to equilibrate interiorly the impact of what has just happened or happened over time, and then weave it together with how to, as you said, re-enter in an informed way that honors both where we have come from over the long haul and this new experience that has opened and deepened and stretched us in whatever number of ways.
Very true. And I think about that's a great process to live in life in general. So not just when you've had a cultural immersion experience,
right?
As you leave any culture and enter into a new one. So maybe you're retiring. For us, sisters who are coming back to the convent, it's more of like a retirement for them, coming out of active ministry and coming into this more of a retirement, transitioning to nursing care. These are all changing cultures. Even changing job from one job to another could very easily have these same needs of really honoring where you've come from, but then entering fully into where you're going and bringing that all those learnings that you've had along with you. So I just see that process being repeated in my life over and over again.
Yeah. I know St. Francis spent perhaps half of his time in caves and contemplation, and we're, as what we're called third order Franciscans, religious Franciscans, we're a little more active than that. But the contemplative is part of this way of being in the world, and how we build in the contemplative pauses. I know when my experience in Latin America, I saw in a sustained way what it would be like to live with relationships prioritized more. As you said, people will drop what they're doing and just sit and want to welcome you and would welcome you. Where for myself here, I've been formed to be pretty time conscious and appointment conscious and organized, and it's it mitigates against sometimes the priority of relationship. And to weave back to what we began about your draw to being sister and expanding your siblings, not
Right?
only to other people in your religious community, all people and all of creation. Well, that's a life work right there.
For sure.
And and presence is part of what can help that happen, actually being attentive to one another and honoring that
Right. Because
uniqueness.
present allows you to see who
Yes.
that person is.
Yes.
I'll go so far as to say, see what that tree is. Like
Yes.
I can walk by a tree every day and never notice it, but I stop and I look and I can see what that tree is. I can think about all the different things that is going on with that tree, whether it's the leaves or the roots or all these different things. I can really start to understand that tree. So how does that then translate to being present to people? Right.
Mhm.
How can you really see who that person is through their stories and their conversation? You start to really understand the depth of that individual. And then how that is then, I'll say radiated is a big word, radiated out into the world. And you can really start to see then all these connections and just the absolute beauty,
Mhm.
this interconnectedness and touching or touching each other and how all those things just create God. I would go so far as to say God's kingdom might be strong.
And it might be true. That, but you're tapping into mystery there. What's seen and what's not seen. And there's always more potential. And that's the nature of love. That's
Very-
infinite capacity. We've got a good mentor in Jesus and in Francis and Claire and some of our elders. And
Mhm.
whoa, we've taken quite a wide-ranging conversation here. Is there anything you want to say about what you think, anything more about what Franciscan values can bring to the world today, or any other wisdom you would offer to people that are looking for something more? They're hungry?
Right, right. Yeah. And that's what I think. I think if I think about it, and I'm going to speak of this country specifically because now that I've spent time in another country, I know that I cannot make broad generalizations
Right, right.
about other cultures. So I would say in this country, we have a great need, a great hunger for love, for inclusion, and for understanding. So we have I need to be, I need to feel included and accepted for what, and I need to, what was the other thing? I need to be understood, right?
Yeah.
And so this gift of presence is the gift we can give each other, because if I need that, others need that too. So as I'm able to give that gift of listening, of taking the time to understand another person, taking the time to really love that person for who they are, then I start to have other people who are doing that for me. And then it just opens up our lives to being a much deeper, richer, more beautiful thing. Because I think, I can't opinion, but I think that that is such a need in the world today. We are so divided, so polarized, and I don't even begin to say one group is the problem.
Yeah.
It is all of us, and we are so divided. And I think this is one of the ways to really start to understand each other and start to be together, because we have become so separated.
The blessing you have is from an immersion in another culture. You have a taste of what that could look like, feel like, be like. You bring that back to apply here. Lovely. Wow. Well, I want to thank you, Meg, for being with us on the podcast today. You've shared stories, reflections, learnings that have opened and deepened your life, your faith, your relationships, your vision. And I just pray that God will bless you and your continued transitions after your time in Bolivia, as well as wherever this may lead going forward. So once again, thank you.
Thank you. It's been such a joy to get to share this with you. I appreciate listening to you on your podcast.
Thanks much. Alrighty, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to you, listeners, for tuning in to the podcast today. I'm looking forward to the next interview in this series on culture and Franciscan spirituality, and invite you back for episode 49, when Jamie Deering, new director of Franciscan Programs Ministry in Little Falls, will speak to integrating diverse gifts and experiences through a Franciscan lens. Until then, may you be blessed with peace and all good.